Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I'm excited about this hearing. I appreciate the panelists that are here today. This is a first in a series of hearings the Oversight and Government Reform Committee intends to have as we talk about emerging technologies. One of the great competitive advantages for the United States of America is our leadership in information technology. It's our leadership in creativity. It is the entertainment industry. We lead in a lot of different areas. And one of the things that the United States has done has been a bastion. It's been a great place for entrepreneurs to come up with creativity and allow those ideas to enter the marketplace and thrive. And they create whole new industries. They create literally millions of jobs and billions of dollars in revenue and income. And there are also some interesting public policy issues that we need to discuss. And as you have new innovative companies and ideas and products and services that consumers are demanding and that the public wants, then we have an opportunity, I think, to make sure that we're fostering that growth and creating an atmosphere where those businesses and entrepreneurs can thrive. So today we're going to start talking about drones, and the next frontier for commerce is that because it does offer some exciting possibilities, but it also does create some challenges and some things that as a public and as a society we need to talk through. Right now, drones are being widely used. First responders are using them to deliver food and medical supplies in areas hit by disaster. Law enforcement envisions using drones to locate missing persons. In the state of Utah, we have a state of Utah, for instance, it's a very big rural component where we have at times raging wildfires and massive public lands. We have people who travel from out of state and want to enjoy our national parks like Arches and Canyonlands, and yet they get lost sometimes. And it's terrain that's very difficult and very expensive for a helicopter to traverse. Maybe drones are the way to do that. Companies big and small are finding new and innovative ways to use drones for inspecting and ensuring the safety of infrastructure, railroad tracks, and telecom systems. I think about Alaska and the pipelines. And there are other great places where drones can be of great help. These drones are being used to monitor oil and gas pipelines, as I mentioned, crops and livestock. They're using them at music festivals and giving the real estate industry a whole new perspective on property and real property as people look at potentially purchasing things. You have big innovative companies that just a decade or two weren't even in business, weren't even around. Companies like Amazon and Google who are researching and developing systems that would allow merchants and customers to deliver and retrieve packages via drones. This is a huge, massive opportunity for the United States of America. On February 15th of this year, the FAA released a proposed rule on the commercial use of drones. This came after years of delay on the heels of a June 2014 report by the Department of Transportation Inspector General that criticized the FAA for being significantly behind its efforts to integrate drones into the national airspace system. The IG concluded that it was unlikely that FAA would meet the statutory deadline of September of this year, 2015, to integrate drones into our airspace. In addition, under current FAA regulations, as well as the proposed rule, it is very difficult for companies that are interested in developing transformative drone technology to even go through the testing of these ideas. Developers have been forced to either limit their testing to small confines of indoor spaces in the United States or to test overseas in a country where the rules are more flexible. In March of 2014, Google's so-called Project Wing started testing deliveries of drones but did so in Australia. A year later, in March of 2015, Amazon began testing drone deliveries in Canada and the United Kingdom after months of waiting for an approval here in the United States of America so that they could test real-world environments in the United States. According to the UAV Trade Association, and yes, there is a UAV Trade Association, every year that integration is delayed, the United States loses more than $10 billion in potential economic impact. I recognize that privacy and safety concerns exist, and I personally share many of those. I don't want my neighbor flying a drone over my backyard peering in my window, and I certainly don't want law enforcement using drones for constant surveillance particularly on private property. But are there appropriate uses for drones in the law enforcement atmosphere, for dealing with large crowds and large events, say the Super Bowl or a Major League Baseball game or whatever it might be? Yes, I think there are appropriate uses. But can they be overused? Yes, and that's why we need to talk candidly about the parameters of that. I also do believe that there are states' rights, and states have a say in this. At what point does the airspace start to become a federal issue? What is the federal nexus? At what point is it a state issue? Because maybe these drones are going to land. I think the state and municipalities probably want to have a say in that as well. But I'd like to think that we can get this right. In fact, we must get it right. The opportunities truly are limitless, and this is why we're having the discussion today. We have a leader in the transportation industry, the former chairman of the T&I Committee, the Transportation Infrastructure T&I Committee here in the United States Congress, who's the chair of our subcommittee on transportation and physical assets. And I'd like to yield some time to Mr. Mica for his comments.
Well, thank you, and I'll be brief. You've covered quite a bit, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for conducting this hearing, particularly at the full committee level, because this does demand not only the Congress attention, but the nation's attention. Drones are here, and UAVs are here, and they're here to stay. When we worked on FAA reauthorization back in 2003, which is not that long ago, really, a dozen years ago, we never even talked about drones. In the last FAA reauthorization about 6, 7 years ago, we did direct FAA to move forward with the rules. And it's important. It's important first for safety. I think we've been very fortunate. We've had some near misses and we've had some hits. But I think you can have the potential of having deadly and involving fatalities, incidents with so many. We now have so many of these UAVs and drones in the air. We now have thousands of them flying. The rules are sketchy. The rules are incomplete. Looking over the progress that's been made, and the rule has been semi-finalized. It's not finalized. People have had a period to comment, but it's still going to take, I'm told, at least another year to finalize that rule and get it in place. In the meantime, again, we have the safety issue. Today we're focusing on commercialization use of the drone, and I'm told that we lose as much as $10 billion a year in revenue for possible use of this with this technology with commercial applications. So we can't delay. I think this is good timing for the hearing. We'll find out where we are with the progress of the approval, and then some of the applications, and then try to stay ahead of the game, which is our responsibility in Congress, particularly on the commercialization side and the benefit of the American people. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize this distinguished ranking member, Mr. Cummings of Maryland, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing. This is a really interesting hearing, and one that I think is extremely important. Drones are an exciting new technology with a lot of potential uses in the not-so-distant future. Companies are developing new technologies to use drones to fight forest fires or even to deliver pizza. However, Mr. Chairman, I share the same concerns as you and many other Americans. I want the use of drones to be safe, and I want to make sure that the privacy interests of the American people are protected. As with any new groundbreaking technology, our regulatory regime has not yet fully caught up with drones, and existing rules do not fully address the concerns Americans have. Our goal must be to balance these concerns in a way that allows for the robust development of these new technologies while ensuring that necessary safeguards are in place. In 2014, there were more than 9.5 million commercial airline flights carrying more than 850 million passengers in the United States, according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Our aviation system is among the safest in the world, and obviously we must ensure that drones do not imperil the operation of our commercial airlines. Allowing drones to fly in the airspace used by commercial jets is a long-term aspiration rather than an imminent possibility. However, although the FAA has approved only a small number of drones to operate in the United States airspace, the Assistant Inspector General of the Department of Transportation has testified to Congress that airline crews have already reported seeing unmanned aircraft around airports, in some cases at altitudes above 2,000 feet. Right now, there does not appear to be a proven technology to ensure that an unmanned aircraft can act on its own to identify and avoid other aircraft. There also does not appear to be a proven technology to ensure that radio links between drones and their operators are maintained consistently. This could cause drones to crash or, equally dangerous, fly out of control. Our aviation system does not allow a wide margin of error. A system to manage drone traffic, even at low altitudes, is still in the very early stages of development and is not ready for deployment. Recognizing the limits of existing technology, the FAA has proposed new regulations that would allow drones weighing less than 55 pounds to operate only during daylight hours, under 500 feet, and less than 100 miles per hour. These rules would also require that drones fly within the line of sight of their operators, who would be allowed to operate only one drone at a time. The use of drones in the United States airspace also raises significant privacy concerns. Drones have been used to gather a wide variety of film footage of people and property. They have been used to gather real-time data on the movements of people without those people even knowing the drones were present. This data can be stored indefinitely, and it can be analyzed and integrated to create very detailed pictures of almost every aspect of a person's life. These possibilities raise a host of privacy concerns that have not been fully addressed by current law or legal precedent. Once it has been lost, privacy is not easily regained. Successfully introducing drones into U.S. airspace will require all parties to strike a balance that threads numerous needles carefully. I'm confident that this can be achieved, but I'm certain it will take time and thoughtful analysis. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to consider these issues today, and I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses. Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. We have to get this right, and we have to get it right in a bipartisan way, and I look forward to doing that. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses, and we do appreciate all 5 of you participating with us today. We're pleased to welcome the Honorable Michael Whitaker, Deputy Administrator for the Federal Aviation Administration at the United States Department of Transportation. John Kowalowski, did I pronounce that properly, I hope, is a PhD. He's also the Director of the Aerospace Systems Program Office at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Mr. Paul Meisner has been with us before, I think yesterday, as the Vice President of Global Public Policy at Amazon.com. Mr. Brian Wynn is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. We're pleased that you're here with us as well. And Mr. Harley Geiger is the Advocacy Director and Senior Counsel at the Center for Democracy and Technology. He'll give us an interesting perspective particularly as it comes to privacy issues. Welcome all. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. So if you please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate it if you would limit your verbal comments to 5 minutes. You'll see a light there that will give you an indication. And then your full written statements will be entered into the record. We also anticipate the members after the hearing will have additional questions. We call them QFRs, questions for the record. We'd appreciate your response to those as well. But for your verbal comments, we'll start with Mr. Whitaker, who is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to discuss the safe integration of unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS, as we refer to them, in the national airspace. Aviation has always been an industry of innovation driven by new technology. Unmanned aircraft are born from that same spirit of innovation. As you've noted in your opening remarks, this technology has thousands of potential uses, from agriculture to news gathering to firefighting and border patrol. But it also introduces new risks into the nation's airspace. At the Federal Aviation Administration, our challenge is to allow for this innovation while maintaining the highest levels of safety. I'm pleased to report that we've made great strides over the past year towards safely integrating UAS into what is the largest, most complex aviation system in the world. The FAA Modernization and Reform Act of 2012 laid out a framework for the safe integration of UAS into the airspace by September 2015, and FAA has made significant progress in meeting those milestones. Perhaps most important among these accomplishments is the publication of the Small UAS Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. This rule, as proposed, creates one of the most flexible regulatory frameworks in the world for UAS operations. We've received thousands of comments to the NPRM, and we're in the process of reviewing those now. Issuing a final small UAS rule remains one of our highest priorities. At the same time, we are taking other steps to enable industry to take advantage of this new technology now. The FAA continues to issue exemptions under Section 333 of the 2012 Act to allow for commercial activity in low-risk, controlled environments. Currently, the FAA is, on average, issuing more than 50 Section 333 exemptions each week. We also continue to work with our partners in government and industry to overcome the largest technical barriers to UAS integration, while ensuring the continued safety of the airspace. There is still a lot to learn about the capabilities and risks posed by UAS. That is why we are leveraging a variety of research tools to give industry greater flexibility and provide FAA additional data that could inform future standards. In December 2013, the FAA selected 6 sites to test UAS technology and operations. These test sites are providing valuable data to our tech center in New Jersey. And we recently announced the Pathfinder program to study UAS operations in circumstances beyond those currently being approved. For example, BNSF Railroad will explore the challenges of using these aircraft to inspect rail infrastructure beyond visual line of sight in isolated areas. These partnerships with industry will help us determine if and how we can safely expand unmanned aircraft operations beyond the parameters set forth in the proposed rule. Beyond commercial applications, UAS have become increasingly available and affordable to the average consumer, most of whom are not trained aviators. Accordingly, the FAA is taking a proactive approach to educate the public on the safe and responsible use of UAS. We partnered with members of industry and the modeling community to initiate the Know Before You Fly outreach campaign, providing recreational operators with the information they need to fly safely and responsibly. This outreach has been successful, and several UAS manufacturers now voluntarily include educational materials in their packaging. The FAA also initiated a No Drone Zone campaign to raise awareness of the prohibition of flying unmanned aircraft near outside sporting events. In May, we built on that success and launched a public outreach campaign for Washington, D.C. to reinforce the message that the city itself and all communities within 15 miles of National Airport constitute a no-drone zone. While our preference is to educate amateur operators about legal compliance, we will use administrative and enforcement action to gain compliance when appropriate. Local law enforcement is often in the best position to respond quickly. The FAA recently issued guidance to first responders on how they can best assist us. The United States has the safest aviation system in the world, and our goal is to integrate this new and important technology while maintaining that high level of safety. The FAA has successfully integrated new technologies in our aviation system for more than 50 years, and we will do the same with unmanned aircraft. We look forward to continuing to work with Congress and industry to achieve these common goals. Thank you, and I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, and we'll hold questions till we've heard from all the panelists. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Kowalowski, and he is the Director of Airspace Operations and Safety Programs at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Welcome, and you're recognized, sir.
Thank you. Chairman Chavez, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to testify on NASA's Aeronautics Research Program and the R&D challenges associated with the operations of unmanned aircraft systems in the national airspace. NASA's strategic thrust in assured autonomy defines our vision and approach for supporting the integration of UAS in the NAS. Our near-term research builds the foundation for the more extensive, transformative changes that autonomous systems will bring over the mid and far term. UAS and autonomous systems hold great promise for the transformation of our aviation system, and we're witnessing the dawn of a new era of aviation innovation, ushering in flight vehicles and operations that are unimaginable today and opening up entirely new commercial markets, much the way jet engines did 60 years ago. NASA is performing research and transitioning concepts, technologies, and knowledge to the FAA and other stakeholders to help them define the requirements, regulations, and standards for safe, routine NASA access. Still, there are significant barriers and research challenges associated with the introduction of autonomous systems and technologies into our aviation system. Addressing these requires the complex systems to be comprehensively evaluated, to verify and validate that they are operating as designed, thus allowing the FAA to establish operations and equipment standards. Now, a significant part of NASA's near-term research work towards safe UAS integration is focused in three areas. First, our sense and avoid research is helping to determine performance requirements for a certifiable system to ensure safe separation of UAS with all vehicles operating in the NAS. Second, we're developing secure, robust, reliable communication systems and protocols. And third, we're addressing the design of ground control stations and displays to maximize pilot effectiveness and safety. Now, to transfer our research findings, NASA has built effective partnerships with key stakeholders, certainly the FAA, but the Department of Defense, also Department of Homeland Security, and industry and academia as well. In these partnerships, NASA is playing a significant role supporting critical activities from the executive level down to our subject matter experts. And now for midterm applications, NASA is researching novel concepts and technologies to facilitate safe operations of UAS at altitudes that are not actively controlled today, such as small UAS, 55 pounds or lighter, operating at altitudes of 500 feet or below. In order to safely enable widespread civilian UAS operations at lower altitudes, NASA is developing an air traffic management-like system called UAS Traffic Management, or UTM. You can think of this much like today's surface traffic management, where vehicles operate within a rule-based system consisting of roads, lanes, signs, and traffic lights. Similarly, the UAS system would provide services such as airspace corridors, terrain avoidance, route planning, and separation management. Working alongside many committed partners, NASA will lead the research, development, and testing of the UTM, utilizing a series of prototypes or builds, each increasing in capability. In fact, the first build will be evaluated in a demonstration in August of this year. And also, in late July, NASA is holding a UTM convention to explore and define the needs of low-altitude, small UAS operations. Over 500 attendees representing the UAS stakeholder community, federal, state, and local government, and the general public have registered to attend. So, through game-changing long-term research, NASA enables growing, sustainable, and transformative aviation systems, achieving this through partnerships built upon clear roles and responsibilities, on long and productive working relationships, and in close and continuous coordination for the specific needs of UAS integration. As the challenges of UAS integration evolve and emerge, NASA Aeronautics will continue to advance the research and develop the enabling technologies that will assure the safe realization of the transformative benefits of UAS and increase the competitiveness of the U.S. civil aviation industry. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. And again, we'll withhold questions so we've heard from all witnesses. And let me recognize now Paul Meisner, Vice President of Global Public Policy with Amazon. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Cummings very much for inviting me. Drones will provide the next generation of commercial delivery service when permitted, so policymakers should expeditiously adopt rules of operation that emphasize drone safety and system performance. Thank you for your attention to this important topic and for holding this hearing. Amazon Prime Air is a future service that will deliver packages of up to 5 pounds to customers in 30 minutes or less using small drones, also known as unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS. Flying beyond line of sight under 500 feet and generally above 200 feet for takeoff and landing, and weighing less than 55 pounds total, Prime Air small UAS vehicles will take advantage of sophisticated sense and avoid technology, as well as a high degree of automation to safely operate at distances of 10 miles or more, well beyond visual line of sight. No country in which we have distribution facilities has yet adopted rules that would allow commercial UAS package deliveries. So we are working with government agencies to develop appropriate rules for small UAS operations. Such rules must allow SUAS operations to take advantage of a core capability of UAS technology, which is to fly with minimal human involvement beyond the visual line of sight of a human operator. Such rules of operation should be proportionate to risk, setting a level of safety but not mandating how that level must be met. Safety is Amazon's top priority, a top priority I know we share with the FAA and NASA, and we are committed to mitigating safety risks. Key aviation authorities outside the United States are rapidly pursuing regulatory frameworks and operational rules for UAS. Their approach is risk and performance-based, and it is mindful of the tremendous opportunities for innovation and economic benefits that UAS present. Here in the United States, the FAA also is taking its UAS responsibilities seriously, and Amazon is grateful for the attention the agency is giving to this new innovative technology. The FAA's small UAS NPRM is a step forward as it speaks to the need for a performance-based approach to rulemaking. We are fully supportive of this approach and agree with it. At the same time, the NPRM has shortcomings, mostly because some of the prohibitions maintained are not actually performance-based, and if adopted as drafted, the rules would not establish a regulatory framework to permit prime air operations in the United States. More specifically, we respectfully disagree with the FAA's current opinion that extending see and avoid principles to small UAS, as well as the potential loss of positive control of small UAS, present, quote, unique safety concerns, which thereby warrant delayed consideration. Although these safety concerns present particular engineering challenges, to be sure, such challenges are not qualitatively different from the other engineering challenges facing small UAS designers, so they should be assessed starting now, ultimately resulting in performance-based operating permissions. Granted, regulators here and abroad cannot quickly adopt actual rules for operations beyond visual line of sight. That may take time, but American policymakers should quickly propose regulatory frameworks and rules for future commercial SUAS operations. Amazon believes that the FAA should act expeditiously and asks that Congress provide legislative guidance to the agency and, if necessary, provide additional legal authority. First and foremost, SUAS regulations must be risk and performance-based. That is, SUAS rules should take into account the risks of operation, including, for example, the absence of passenger and crew, the lower kinetic energy of aircraft, and the very low operating altitudes, and evaluate how UAS performance mitigates these risks. Categorical prohibitions, for example, no nighttime operations or no operations beyond visual line of sight, make no sense and must be avoided. Likewise, highly automated UAS vehicles should be allowed to fly if they meet performance of multiple highly automated small UAS vehicles. Given the interstate nature of commercial SUAS operations, states and localities must not be allowed to regulate SUAS that the FAA has authorized, including with respect to airspace, altitude, purpose of operations, performance, and operator qualifications. uniform federal rules must apply. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you and your committee and the FAA to help the United States expeditiously adopt rules for SUAS operations that emphasize safety and system performance, and thereby permitting drones to provide Americans the next generation of commercial delivery service safely and soon. And thank you. I welcome your questions.
Thank you. And we'll now hear from Mr. Brian Wynn, President and CEO of Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Welcome, and you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I represent the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, the world's largest nonprofit organization devoted exclusively to advancing the unmanned systems and robotics community. AUVSI has been a voice of unmanned systems for more than 40 years, and currently we have more than 7,500 members, including over 600 corporate members. The unmanned aircraft industry is poised to be one of the fastest growing in American history. Our economic impact study found that the first decade following UAS integration will result in more than $82 billion in U.S. economic activity and create more than 100,000 new high-paying jobs. The FAA Modernization and Reform Act of 2012 established a foundation for government and industry collaboration to advance this emerging sector. As part of this, the FAA is currently working on finalizing rules for commercial and public use of this technology. The agency is also granting permission in areas. Otherwise, we risk stunting a still nascent industry. UAS technology is advancing rapidly, thanks to collaboration between industry and government. In order to continue encouraging innovation and promoting safety, we need to pass and sign into law an FAA reauthorization measure before the current authorization expires in September. Let me highlight a number of specific directions that we would like to see reflected going forward. First, the industry supports a risk-based, technology-neutral framework. This means regulation should be based on the risk profile of a particular UAS operation rather than the platform being flown. For example, low-risk operations such as aerial surveys above rural farmland would be regarded as safe, with minimal regulatory barriers, regardless of the specific technology or platform used. This flexible framework will accommodate innovations rather than require new rules each time a new technology emerges. Second, we support a comprehensive industry government research plan. There is a lot of good work already being done, and better coordination will ensure we're maximizing the impact of these efforts. While the recently announced Pathfinder program and UAS Center of Excellence show great progress, we need better visibility on how they will fit into the larger UAS integration picture. Third, Congress should consider making the FAA UAS test sites eligible for existing federal funding. While these test sites have been active for over a year, access to funding will help give industry guidance and incentive to better utilize the test sites. Fourth, we support the development of a UAS traffic management system. Some commercial UAS operations will occur at low levels, and this airspace may become complex. A traffic management system will integrate UAS into the existing national airspace infrastructure and ensure the continued safety of the airspace for all users, manned and unmanned. Finally, knowing that UAS integration must be done in coordination with the next-gen air transportation system, there is also an opportunity to consider linking the two efforts and their resources more effectively. We are pleased to see the FAA recognize the need for more senior-level attention with a new director and a new senior advisor position on UAS integration, and look forward to working with those individuals once they are aboard. In closing, UAS technology is at an exciting and pivotal stage, with new applications being contemplated nearly every day. Unmanned aircraft systems increase human potential, allowing us to execute dangerous or difficult tasks safely and efficiently. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your
Thank you, and we'll get back to you for questions. Mr. Harley Geiger, and he is Advocacy Director and Senior Counsel for the Center of Democracy and Technology. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to testify today on the subject of unmanned aircraft systems, also known as drones. I am Harley Geiger, Senior Counsel at the Center for Democracy and Technology. CDT is a nonpartisan, nonprofit technology policy advocacy organization dedicated to preserving civil liberties such as privacy and free speech while enabling government agencies to provide security and companies to innovate. I have 3 overarching points that I want to make with regard to drones. My testimony focuses on privacy, although clearly there are many other policy issues that are associated with unmanned aircraft. First, unmanned aircraft systems are a promising technology, but have potential to erode civil liberties by enabling pervasive surveillance. Second, current laws do not provide strong privacy protection from government or private unmanned aircraft, and the lack of privacy protection undermines public trust, which holds back the industry. Third, to earn public acceptance of UAS, which will promote its commercial growth, both government and the UAS industry should fully address civil liberties issues through a combination of legislation and an industry code of conduct. In my time remaining, I'll expand on these points. The CDT wants to see UAS used for commerce, for journalism, disaster relief, scientific research, and more. However, neither the government nor the UAS industry should ignore the potential for UAS to enable pervasive surveillance that undermines civil liberties. Now, here is a nightmare scenario for civil liberties. Law enforcement establishes a broad-based drone dragnet that constantly tracks individuals in populated outdoor areas, chilling the public's right to free expression, free association, and assembly. At the same time, a network of commercial unmanned aircraft record footage of virtually every American who steps out of her home, even if that individual remains on private property. And this may seem like a far-fetched future to some. However, few existing laws would stand in the way, and the public does not yet trust the discretion of the government or the UAS industry to prevent this scenario from becoming a reality. When it comes to government UAS, CDT believes that prolonged physical surveillance of individuals in public places violates Fourth Amendment principles. However, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that Americans have no expectation of privacy from aerial surveillance. The Supreme Court has even held that the Fourth Amendment is not violated when a police helicopter looks into the interior of a private building through a hole in the ceiling without a warrant. Bottom line, there is very little protection in terms of privacy from government use of UAS outdoors. Law enforcement use is perhaps the most acute concern that the public has with UAS. And to address the public's concern, Congress should pass legislation that, among other things, establishes due process standards for law enforcement use of UAS. And Congress should limit law enforcement use to instances where the government has a warrant or exigent circumstances or other narrowly tailored reasonable exceptions. CDT believes that the Preserving American Privacy Act from Representatives Poe and Lofgren, as well as Senator Wyden's Protecting Individuals from Mass Aerial Surveillance Act, which was introduced today, would provide strong due process protection without unreasonably burdening non-law enforcement uses such as scientific research. CDT supports these bills and urges Congress to pass them swiftly. When it comes to private sector UAS, common law privacy torts provide Americans with some protection from private sector UAS out of the home, but only if the conduct is highly offensive to a reasonable person. However, any government regulation of private UAS must not violate our First Amendment right to take photographs from public places. An industry code of conduct would help provide privacy protections from private UAS where direct regulation cannot, but it will be effective only if the industry agrees to adopt a strong and enforceable code. The code proposed by AUVSI does not cut it. The code should establish reasonable limits on UAS collection and retention of personally identifiable information. And the code should also create a publicly accessible registry of UAS data collection policies, though there should be reasonable exceptions for that registry. And the code should also establish cybersecurity standards to prevent hijacking and unauthorized damage to UAS systems. And finally, CDT recommends that the industry explore technical measures to protect individual privacy in physical space, as well as enhance transparency for private UAS systems. Thank you very much for holding this hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, and thank all of the witnesses. We'll go right to questions. Okay. As I mentioned in my opening statements, having been involved in this a little while, back in 2003 when we did one of the first FAA reauthorizations, There was nothing in the bill. It's amazing how technology does change our lives, and it's amazing how government does fail to keep up with changes in technology and craft the law to match that. We fall further and further behind, it seems. In 2012, when we did the last FAA reauthorization, I tried to get specific and hold people's feet to the fire. And we do that by putting some milestones and deadlines. And in the law, we said, for example, Mr. Whitaker, we said, required planning for integration. This is the law that was passed. A comprehensive plan not later than 270 days after the enactment of this act, the Secretary of Transportation consultation with representatives of aviation and federal agencies basically would come up with the plan. Was that deadline met?
Yes, sir. Both a comprehensive plan and a 5-year roadmap were developed. They were both published in November of 2013.
2013. Okay. To further hold the feet to the fire, and some things have been done, as we pointed out, and I mentioned earlier. We put a deadline. The plan required under paragraph 1 shall provide the safe integration of civil unmanned aviation systems into the national airspace as soon as practicable, but not later than September 30th, 2015. That's the deadline we put in there. Is that deadline going to be met?
Well, you certainly won't have full integration of UAS.
But the deadline is not going to be met?
No.
Okay.
And there are some
When do you predict the deadline will be met?
Well, we're taking the issue in manageable bites, if you will.
Yeah, and you testified that you're granting exemptions and waivers at a pretty rapid rate. What'd you say, 50 a week or something?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but that's not what we intended. We intended for basically to have the rule in place by September. It's not going to be met. Now we're going to do an FAA bill, guys and gals, and we should hold their feet to the fire again. I don't know how you hold the feet to the fire because we've missed the deadline that we set in here, but we're going to have to do something. Is there something we're missing that that we haven't done that could provide you with the assets to move forward or make certain this happens as soon as possible? And what's your deadline now?
We have broken the task into pieces, if you will.
When will it be done? What was directed by law?
So the rule was issued earlier this year in February. Comments were closed in April. We've received 4,500, approximately 4,500 comments.
And all that's part of the record. When will we be done?
So the rule, we have to adjudicate those comments. We'll clear the rule out by the end of the year.
16, 17?
The rule will be in place within the year.
Within a year.
That's correct.
So, okay, mark that down, staff. We could do a hearing a year from now and see if they've completed the task. The problem we have in the meantime is, again, you're granting exceptions and waivers. It's sort of a spotty policy that's in place. And some folks talked about addressing risk, and that's the most important thing, wouldn't you say, is avoiding risks?
Safety is certainly our priority, yes.
But by the same token, we're falling a little bit further behind than some of the other countries. Mr. Meisner, what have you seen? This hearing's about commercialization and moving forward. Are we, as the U.S., falling further behind? I cited $10 billion, I guess $1 billion a year for the next 10 years we would lose by not having commercial rules in place for operation of drones.
U.S. planning is not as aggressive, Mr. Chairman, as it is in other countries.
Okay. But there are a host of issues, privacy, and we had this little question here with the staff and some of us. Who basically is in charge of setting the rules for privacy? Is it the individual states and law enforcement? Is it the Department of Justice? Is this an FAA responsibility and the rules that you're crafting? Mr. Whitaker, maybe you could shed some light on how we protect people's privacy.
The President issued a presidential memorandum
Right.
in February designating the National Telecommunication Information Administration as the lead on this issue. They have opened for public comment. I think that has closed. We are certainly a stakeholder in this conversation, but we do.
So we need to call them and ask them when they'll have their rules in place for protecting privacy.
They have the lead on this issue.
But it is multi-jurisdictional. It's beyond just the federal level to protect privacy, isn't it?
Aviation has always been a federal initiative and preemptive of state authorities, and I would assume.
Well, a drone that's operating under 500 feet, whose responsibility would that be? Also federal, or can you? I mean, local law enforcement is already using some devices, and other folks are using it. Who controls and that's probably the biggest concern of privacy, is somebody within 500 feet over people's homes, property, surveillance capability of these drones.
Yeah, by statute, even at those altitudes, it's federal airspace.
Still our responsibility. So we'll wait to see the development of that and specifics on that rule.
Sir?
I predict that there will be, that sometimes we don't move until there's an incident. There will be an incident. There will be a crash. There will be probably fatalities because you have so many of these things flying. I hope it doesn't take down a big commercial aircraft. I hope it doesn't have a lot of fatalities, but I think it's inevitable. How many thousands of these drones are now flying? I've heard different figures from several thousand to 20,000 flying.
I don't know the exact figures. Perhaps Mr. Wynn does, but I think it's important to distinguish. The vast majority of those are amateur operations. They're not covered under the rule, and we're prohibited by statute from regulating that sector of the.
So that still remains the primary risk. Did you want to comment, Mr. Geiger?
To your question on who is in charge of privacy here,
Yeah.
So the FAA is regulating safety, and safety is a very limited mandate when it comes to also providing privacy regulations. So I have some question as to whether or not the FAA could actually put forth rules on privacy. Now,
well, and this was interesting because when we were talking about this several years ago when we crafted this legislation, I was told it was the Department of Justice or judicial matter, that privacy, and it was outside of our realm to regulate. But maybe in this FAA bill, do you think we should have, rather than the president set by edict or whatever, however he did it, what was it, executive order?
Presidential memorandum.
it was
Presidential
a memorandum that
Should we have something in federal law? Final question.
we do think that there should be standards in federal law. The 2012 bill mentioned privacy exactly 0 times, and the privacy issue has absolutely plagued the discussion.
Now,
about
you
this
said the
industry since then.
2012
The
bill.
FAA Modernization and
Yeah,
Reform Act.
I just explained to you, when we started down that path, concerns were raised on both sides of the aisle about privacy. It's a big deal. That we were told it was outside our realm. It was really a judicial matter and outside the purview of the Transportation Committee who was considering the legislation at the time. So we're basically without anything except with what the president has set forth, and maybe that should some parts of that should be codified. Is that would be a summary of your
Some
position?
parts of it, although what the president set forth is also quite limited. The Department of Justice essentially says that, I mean, there's some good things in the policy guidance from the Department of Justice, but it is also very limited. It says that they'll respect laws, they'll use UAS for an authorized use and harmonize with the Fourth Amendment, but it doesn't provide any additional protection really beyond what is in current law. The NTIA process is focused just on commercial drones. So, the NTIA process is not going to touch government use.
Great. Okay. Well, let's go to the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Geiger, the expectation of privacy, you talked about that, and certainly we know that in court cases, a lot of the question comes down to what is expected of the person. I guess when you have drones, it really broadens the expectation. Is that right? I mean, it kind of throws them. I mean, it just opens the door to all kinds of surveillance, and you follow what I'm saying?
I do, and I believe that this is how
Can you speak
courts-
a little louder, please?
I do, and I believe that this is how courts will interpret that in the future. Right now, the Supreme Court has interpreted the reasonable expectation of privacy doctrine to not include aerial surveillance from the publicly navigable airspace. And I can only imagine that that reasonable expectation of privacy standard, or in common law torts, what counts as highly offensive to a reasonable person, I will only imagine that that will shrink as more and more UAS take to the skies. And this is one reason why we are arguing that current federal law does not provide adequate privacy protection. We should not just rely on common law or the Fourth Amendment, that there ought to be something in federal law that provides a due process standard.
And what would you, if you were trying to put that law together to try to balance allowing drones to operate, but at the same time trying to maintain some reasonable semblance of privacy for citizens of our country? I mean, what would that look like? I mean, do you have something that you put together that what elements would you be looking at?
There are a couple of bills out there right now which provide a good starting point. Representative Poe and Lofgren's Preserving American Privacy Act, Senator Wyden's Protecting Individuals from Mass Aerial Surveillance Act provide good starting points. And both of those bills are focused largely on law enforcement use. And this is, as I said in my opening statements, in part because the public's concern with privacy in UAS is most acutely felt with law enforcement use. I don't think that people are quite as concerned with uses for research, disaster relief, and so forth. And on the commercial side, any regulation would have to be aligned with the First Amendment, and therefore will be limited. And so I think a combination of a due process standard and an industry code of conduct could provide meaningful privacy protection to individuals. On government use, we think that there ought to, generally speaking, be a warrant standard with exceptions for exigent circumstances and other reasonable exceptions for law enforcement use, as well as a registry of government UAS applications that is publicly available, much in the same way that the FAA currently has a registry for small aircraft.
You know, with all of the cameras everywhere, on light posts, on buildings, and of course, as you well know, many crimes are solved. People don't even know that they're being observed. And it seems to me there's an argument that with all of that now, that technology out there, that why would one want to differ from, stray away from the idea that a drone is going too far? And I just, as I'm talking, I'm figuring the argument, the drone can follow you,
well,
as opposed to the light posts.
So first of all, we do have civil liberties concerns with a ground-based, large-scale surveillance system. So our concern is largely tech neutral, but drones do have unique capabilities, mostly because of their vantage point. If you're talking about ground-based CCTV, then if you turn a corner or enter your fenced-in yard, then the ground-based CCTV can no longer see you. But it would be very hard to escape the scope of observation of a sophisticated and high-flying UAS. So the privacy intrusion is potentially greater.
Mr. Messner, can you tell me about how Amazon, I just want to know the logistics, how that works. What are you all trying to do? Somebody has a package that they want in Iowa tonight. So what happens?
Well, a customer places.
And the package is in Washington. Go.
Mr. Cummings, we have I have 3 seconds.
I just want to picture how it works.
It's a very fast delivery system. We have distribution facilities throughout the country, and what we'd like to be able to do is enable that network of facilities to deliver packages to customers more quickly than is currently possible using the ground transportation network. We looked into all different kinds of functionalities of how to get things to customers on a 30-minute or less basis, and what really works are drones. And so in this way, our customer will be able to order something off of our website and have it delivered in less than 30 minutes to his or her home. That means that she doesn't even have to go to the store, hop in the car, or try to get a delivery truck to bring it. It just gets delivered to her house.
So it just pops up on the drone right in front of your door?
Yep. Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Nguyen, the FAA's proposed rulemaking lists some
We've got a
potential
basket of fresh fruit headed your way right now, Mr.
potential uses of drones such as crop monitoring, bridge inspections, and aerial photography. Can you give us a few other examples of potential commercial use of drones?
Well, there's all manner of infrastructure that needs to be inspected in the country. For example, natural gas pipelines, high utility, high voltage lines, et cetera. That would be another example of large industries that are just chomping at the bit to embrace this technology. So there's small uses, there's large uses, there's visual line of sight when it comes to taking pictures of a house from a different angle for a real estate agent, all the way through to insurance companies inspecting after a Hurricane Sandy event, what's going on in a particular area, areas that are inaccessible to agents, for example, and gaining information as quickly as possible.
Now, Mr. Whitaker, FAA's mission is, and I quote, to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. Can you explain some of the challenges of integrating drones into our nation's airspace?
One of the challenges is that we have a much more complex and diverse airspace than any other country, and a busier airspace. So in addition to 4 of the biggest airlines in the world and dozens of hubs, you have business aviation, you have nearly 200,000 general aviation operations, helicopters, rescue vehicles that fly in all airspace. So integrating, instead of just setting aside a space to operate, but actually integrating into the airspace requires that these new vehicles be able to stay clear of the existing vehicles. So detect and avoid, or sense and avoid, that's a major technological challenge that has to be solved. And then you also have to solve the communications challenge, how the operator communicates with the vehicle, what the spectrum is that's allocated for that, and what happens if that link breaks. So these are some of the technology issues that are being researched in various venues that we need to fully understand and then build standards around so we can fully integrate this into the system.
You know, not long ago, the fellow flew a drone in the vicinity of the warehouse, the White House, and all of us were very concerned about that. And I know that that's a significant concern of many. And I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, if you've got all of these objects flying around, and then you've got a lot of people on the ground, and you've got to protect airspace, it just seems to me like we are headed towards disaster at some point.
Well, we're going to try to make sure that doesn't happen, but there are actually very robust technologies that will allow this to happen, and they're being tested in various.
That will allow what to happen?
They will allow the vehicles to stay clear from humans and other vehicles. We just need to make sure that that technology is robust enough to incorporate into our air system.
All right, I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, I'm glad to see that we have a proposed rule here. We've been waiting on it for a long time. I serve on the Transportation Committee, and we've been pushing for this. So I'm excited to see this, and I think it does allow a large class of operations that heretofore have not been able to operate. But Mr. Nguyen, can you talk about the types of commerce that won't be facilitated by this rule, particularly the requirement that at all times there has to be an operator that's got visual line of sight to the drone? Can you talk about some of the applications that can't be practiced because of that rule?
Well, the easy one is Mr. Meisner's, the application that he was talking about earlier. That does require beyond visual line of sight. There is all manner of inspections that I was mentioning as well. BNSF was mentioned earlier, being able to check for split rails in advance of trains, other infrastructure, et cetera. And just if you imagine, one of the early applications, early adopters of this technology will be agricultural interests, farmers, et cetera, looking to do all manner of inspection of their property. Some of these farms are large, of course, and someone could easily be flying over their property but have that well beyond line of sight, again, basically flying a pattern that a computer is controlling, very low altitude. So these are the types of operations that we think, some of them are more complex than others. We think that there's a way to advance the technology, to test the technology. The more we're flying, again, equivalent level of safety to the current aircraft system, airspace system that we have today, the more data we can collect, the more we can test technologies like detect and avoid, sense and avoid, et cetera. And there are a number of those things, low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
So, Mr. Whitaker, is there any chance before this rule comes out to have a category of drones that are authorized in low-risk situations like agriculture or power line inspection or rail inspection? Is there a chance to get something in the rule for that category?
Well, what we've done while the rule is pending is we issue exemptions, and we've done over 600 exemptions for commercial operators, and we've done even more than that for public sector operations, for fire and rescue, that type of thing. The rule, as you mentioned, will take care of a very large subset of operations and will allow a lot more commercial innovation without our involvement. We've tried to include in the rule the issues where we think we have a clear understanding of the safety risks and how they can be mitigated. The issues that are outside of the rule, like beyond of sight, we think we'll get there, and we're going to try to get there as quickly as we can, but there are still technology issues and standards that have to be developed. So we will have to work very diligently to keep that moving as the rule progresses.
All right, thank you. On to the privacy aspect of this, it does present some new challenges. One question that I have is, should there be a floor? I mean, we're talking about a ceiling of 500 feet. Should there be a floor for operation of drones? Do you own the property an inch above your lawn, is a question that I have. If you have a gate, a locked gate on your property, and somebody climbs over the gate, your expectation is they are violating your privacy. What if they fly over the gate? And what if they're hovering an inch above the ground? Mr. Geiger, could you talk to that from a personal property aspect? When are your property rights being violated?
So courts have generally said that you own a reasonable amount of airspace above your property. The 400-foot level is more or less arbitrary. An inch above your property, yeah, you probably own that. 30 feet above your property, not sure. And what counts as reasonable, again, as more and more UAS fill the sky in tens, hundreds of thousands, which is what we predict in the coming decades, what counts as reasonable will probably shrink. And it's not clear what the floor will be, but generally, if you have an expectation of property ownership and as much airspace as you can use, and so the drone would have to violate or reduce a substantial interest or use in your property in order to be liable for a trespass claim.
Maybe the floor is the range for number 12 gauge with 6-shot in it.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because the concept of shooting down drones, I think, demonstrates the depth of concern that people have. And this is a privacy-based concern with drones. Now, this happens on a pretty regular basis, right? I mean, just 2 weeks ago, there were firefighters that were tending to a house fire, and in the aftermath of that house fire, used their hose to spray a drone that was watching them. And the drone was not directly over them, so it wasn't like a safety issue, but it was watching them. And you know, I'm absolutely not condoning that type of activity. I think that it's very risky, but it demonstrates the need for the depth of public concern regarding privacy, and I think the need for a baseline.
So maybe we need rules of engagement in terms, in addition to rules of privacy. I see my time's expired. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must say we're in the infancy of everything here, the infancy of regulation, the infancy of the technology. We saw that when a drone landed in the White House and indeed on these very Capitol grounds. And Mr. Whitaker, I appreciate that that on May 13th, there's a release that indicates that you're trying to make the public understand that there's a 15-mile radius around the nation's capital, that you're not supposed to fly anything. So everybody's playing catch-up here. Now, in one of my other committees, I must tell you where we're really playing catch-up is Next Gen. So that when I look at your regulations and it says must yield right of way to other aircraft, manned or unmanned. I mean, if we had Next Gen and we knew where even aircraft were flying, then of course, then we might expect drones to somehow operate within our airspace more safely. The Assistant Inspector General has testified about the integration of drones into commercial airspace, and that's what interests me. Does the FAA receive from commercial pilots each month or on any regular basis whether they have seen unmanned aircraft of any kind?
We do receive reports of sightings of unmanned aircraft. They typically will come in over the air traffic control communication network, and we do track those.
Are those required to be reported, Mr. Whitaker?
They are required to be reported, yes.
Have any close calls of drones or unmanned aircraft with commercial aircraft been reported?
I don't have any recollection of any evasive maneuvers being taken as a result. Mostly what we receive is sightings of unmanned aircraft in controlled airspace, usually near airports.
Is there any system of licensing these aircraft, I mean these unmanned aircraft? I mean, do we even know how many there are in our country?
We believe that these typically are involving the amateur operators of what we tend to call model aircraft, but the kind that you can buy and operate anywhere. They're unregulated, and we're prohibited by statute from regulating that sector of the operation.
Should somebody be regulating that sector, and who should be?
Well, what we have is we do have areas where these operators are prohibited from flying, and so they're wandering into prohibited airspace. So in that sense, they are violating law. So our focus, as you have pointed out, has been to have an education campaign to let people know where they can fly, where they can't fly. We're working to develop an app that people can use to see if they're in restricted airspace or whether they can fly their unmanned air system. And we work with local law enforcement to give them guidelines on how to interact with people who are operating in an inappropriate fashion.
In light of these proposed rules, Mr. Meisner, and Amazon's interest, it says an operator should be capable of seeing the aircraft with vision unaided by any device other than corrected lenses. In other words, I suppose you're supposed to be within somehow, you're supposed to be able to see these drones that you have let loose upon the universe. How's that going to work commercially?
Thank you, Ms. Norton. It won't, at least for package delivery services. We don't disagree that it's a more difficult use case to fly drones beyond visual line of sight. It is. It requires a higher degree of automation in vehicles, and we are working on that. That kind of technology is being developed. Our respectful disagreement with the FAA is that we believe that that kind of operation can be considered right now on the same risk-based approach. The risks are higher.
You think the technology the technology would allow that now?
Oh, it's in the works, Ms. Norton. And all I'm saying is, I'm not saying that the rules for operation need to be adopted right now, but the serious planning for those future rules need to be undertaken right now. And what the NPRM did earlier this year is essentially list that as a prohibited kind of a category of operation. And what we're trying to say is that that ought to be considered right now, just like other countries are considering beyond visual line of sight operations right now.
Mr. Whitaker, this notion of lost link scenarios, what's the current state of technology on the links between the operator and the drone and the possibility of the drone getting beyond the vision or, for that matter, the control? I'm sure that the drone that went into the White House grounds was beyond his control, for example.
So there's research that goes on. There's a lot of research that goes on at NASA, at DoD, various sectors on loss of control. We have a Center of Excellence now at Mississippi State where there will be research along these lines. And as I mentioned, BNSF Rail.
I mean, if you see a drone going too far, is the technology now such that you can call it back?
There is technology there that can be used for that, and that is the technology that's being tested. As that technology is tested, we also have to develop standards for operation, particularly in the radio communication spectrum and how that gets defined.
Standards, for example, that would that would make sure that you didn't lose control of your own unmanned aircraft.
Right, and there are procedures that could be followed when that happens.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Meadows?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for your testimony. Mr. Meisner, let me come to you because I think you were indicating that the United States is falling behind on this particular use of drone technology to some of competition that may be in Europe and other places. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Meadows, it is.
So if we are falling behind, obviously Mr. Whitaker says we have a very complex air system, which I would agree with that, more complex than Europe. But from a regulatory standpoint, do you see that we could perhaps have had in this rulemaking going a little bit further to anticipate new technology, to allow for greater innovation so that we don't get beat out by our competition in other parts of the world?
Yes, Mr. Meadows, I firmly believe that. And I acknowledge that the U.S. airspace is complicated, but it's also complicated around Heathrow and other places around the world. And so we need to acknowledge that other countries are just taking a more forward-looking planning approach. Again, I don't blame the FAA for not having rules in place. This is a big challenge, and NASA and the FAA and private industry are working together to address the technical challenges. What I'm suggesting is that the risk-based approach taken throughout much of the NPRM also could be applied to these beyond visual line of sight and highly automated operations that we foresee.
So, Mr. Whitaker, let me come back to you then. I serve on the T&I committee. We've had a number of hearings. We've talked about these 6 regional test areas across the United States. And what I have found interesting is, as we have come out with this proposed rule, is that most of this seems to be a rule that is looking backwards, not forward. For example, I mean, looking at not being able to operate these other than line of sight or at night is extremely short-sighted, I believe, in terms of a rule. And so it's almost like in order to meet some of the deadlines, you've put forth a rule that is very restrictive instead of really saying that if there's the technology, which we have the technology to manage this other than line of sight, could we not do that in a safe manner?
So we had a lot of debate around this as the rule was put together, and I think initially there was an attempt to boil the ocean, if you will, and take on all possible issues in the rule. And the decision was made to come up with a less onerous rule that covers the majority of the types of operations that we know people want to undertake, that the technology is there, it's proven it can happen. So we defined an envelope of operation, if you will. And the things that are in that envelope, it will unleash a lot of the commercial need that's there. The issues that are still out there to be worked out and to have standards built around, we do have regulatory tools to allow those to go forward without waiting for a rulemaking through exemption.
But Mr. Whitaker, if we're talking about, you say that it would provide for most of what we're talking about, I would disagree with that if we're talking about line of sight. Because what Mr. Meisner and Mr. Wynn are talking about really is not line of sight. Doctor, you work for NASA. Can you put something out in space or on the moon without, in a safe way, and do it without line of sight?
Well, I work
Be careful how you answer.
Yes, sir. working in the aeronautics mission at NASA. I won't speak to the space applications.
Well, can
But-
some of your colleagues do that, I guess? Or, I mean, do they have to view that the whole way to where it lands in order for it to be safe?
That is certainly not the case.
Okay. So I guess, Mr. Whitaker, coming back to you, I'm going to encourage you, as we are looking for a FAA reauth in less than 60 days, I am encouraging you to be a little bit more forward-thinking as it comes to the line of sight and some of the technology that is available to us today. The stakeholders, I mean, it's all over. And because if not, your regulations become the throttle or the choke that keeps innovation from moving us forward, and ultimately we will lose out to competition abroad. Do I have your commitment that you will look at that aggressively?
We will, and I think granting the BNSF Railroad authority to operate beyond line of sight is part of that effort to lean forward.
All right. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the panel members for your help this morning. I think all of you have contributed well to this, to the understanding that we are gaining regarding this technology. Mr. Geiger, I think some of the ramifications that you've brought to mind are very, very helpful. Mr. Whitaker, the problem that I have, the greatest concern I have is the interface or the fit between FAA and a technology which might become ubiquitous at some point in the near future. And in your testimony, or in one of your answers, you said that the system being developed will allow us to keep drones away from people and other sensitive areas. The problem I have is with what you're doing now with aircraft. I represent Logan Airport, that area. Myself and Mr. Capuano from Boston in the 8th and 7th districts, we represent a semicircle around the airport. So we're airport communities. And I hate to put this on you, but I would have to say that out of all the agencies that we deal with on this committee, and we deal with everybody, NSA, CIA, DOD, Defense Department and others, IRS, FAA is probably the most unresponsive agency that we deal with in government from this committee. And that's just a fact. And I want to give you an example. The FAA has adopted since 2013, has adopted a new navigation system around airports, Next-Gen RNAV, they call it. I don't know what that means, but I do know that the result of that program is that instead of flights being spread out over a number of communities, which I represent all of them, and Mike does too, Mike Capuano, now we have a different system where we have a tractor beam system where all of the flights come over the same, I swear, square foot of land every day, every night. And so the people who live underneath that tractor beam, I'm worried about their health. Based on the volume and the spirit of the calls that I get continually from those neighborhoods and those towns, this system is not working, and it is detrimental to their health. So as an elected representative, I try to get a meeting with the FAA in the town of Milton, Massachusetts, which is under that tractor beam. And I wrote a letter to Mr. Huerta, who's the regional administrator in my area, refused to come. First, they agreed to come in the meeting that I had with them, and then once they got out of the meeting, they changed their mind and said they never agreed to that. So I'm trying to get FAA. Look, I understand how difficult it is to operate, the airport and do your job, but we have a basic responsibility to meet with the people that we work for. And some of the folks at FAA have said those folks have yelled at us. They have yelled at me too. That's part of the job. And sometimes they have a good reason to yell at me and you. And I think they have one now. So I have been so frustrated with this process of just getting a meeting in the town of Milton that I had to go on the floor the other day and put an amendment on the floor to cut $25 million from FAA's budget. because they're not, because we give you money to do outreach. Well, outreach is not happening in the 8th Congressional District of Massachusetts, I can tell you right now. So I figured since you're not doing that job, I'll take that money and put it somewhere else where somebody will actually use it. So that's where we're at right now, you and me, and Mr. Capuano and the FAA. You're not treating, you know, I don't mind being dissed myself. I can deal with that. Look, Congress's popularity is like 6%. I'm used to that. However, when you refuse to meet with the people that I represent, then I get mad. I can't have that. Nobody here can have that. We all represent, look, I represent 727,514 people. Those are my bosses. I go to work for them every single day, and I can't get a meeting with a group of them and the FAA. So we got a problem. And now here we are talking about, like I said, this new technology at some point could become ubiquitous. So I'm nervous because when we have a problem with drones, I'm going to have to go to the FAA for a meeting. And they're probably going to tell me, sorry, pal, you know, we're busy. We can't meet with you. I can't have that answer. All right, so you got 3 seconds to answer me.
Okay, so first of all, I apologize if the FAA has been unresponsive.
Apology accepted.
I'm not familiar with the issue, but I will vow to get back with you directly with a response to that. And I think community outreach and engagement is one of the most important things that we do, and if we don't do it, particularly as we redesign airspace, it does lead to trouble. So let me make sure that we get back with you shortly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I appreciate the chairman's indulgence. Thank you.
All politics is local. Mr. Heiss?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wait a second.
Yes.
Mr. Walker was next. I apologize. You have been heard, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Heiss.
I'm sorry, but you are recognized, Mr. Walker, and we'll get to Heiss next.
Thank you very much. As a member on the Committee of Homeland Security, we have had several classified briefings as far as the concerns, even locally and regionally. I know there's a lot of issues that have to be worked out, particularly with the UAVs and UASs. I want to take a little bit of a turn here and talk about some of the pros, some of the positives from possibly the new technology as we move forward. I always, if you look back historically, anytime there's something that's new that developed, there's always a little bit of a pushback and reactionary. Even in my 46 years, I can remember several different timelines when it comes to technological-based industry or other aspects. I want to talk about, maybe start with Mr. Wynn. According to your data and your department there, believes that the U.S. could be in line to lose more than $10 billion in potential economic impact every year that the U.S. integration is delayed. Would you take just a minute and speak to that? Is that accurate?
Yes, sir, and that's in the community that I represent, the commercial UAS community. That goes. I think there's additional value that can be added to other industries that want to utilize the technology that go on top of that.
Okay. Mr. Meisner, what steps, well, let me back up just a little bit. According to Amazon Prime Air, you have been doing more testing in other countries. Can you speak to that? Do you have less restrictions, or why do you seem to be doing a little bit more testing in the other countries as opposed to here?
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I think we have turned that corner with the FAA. The FAA has streamlined their test approval process in a way that is beneficial to the industry. It's going to accelerate the amount of testing that can be done here domestically. We had some difficulties getting that approval last year and early this year, but I think we've turned that corner now. The real direction we need to take now is sort of the planning for the operational rules, and we look forward to working with the FAA on that we're eager to do so. But on testing, I think we're able to do it in multiple locations, including within the United States.
What is the objective of Amazon? If you give me a timeline over the next year to 18 months, where are you wanting to see this go, providing that things are worked out with the FAA?
Well, we'd like to start delivering to our customers as soon as it's approved regulatorily. So we are working on the technology as quickly as we can. We've got an advanced team. Amazon doesn't sound like an aviation company, but we certainly have staffed up with aviation experts, including on my team. I've got an 8,000-hour military and commercial pilots on my team. We're taking this very seriously. The safety aspect of it is front and center. The team is trying to develop this service as quickly as possible. Now, there are other things that are going on here. It's not just the aviation aspects of it. We have to get our fulfillment center and our distribution facilities right, because to get that 30-minute promise down, we have to get that item somewhere in a very large building ready to get to the drone. And so this presents another set of engineering challenges that we're working on for our customers.
And you said you're working, do you have the technology in place to move forward, providing that all the other restrictions are given the green light?
Today, no. But we will have it in place by the time any regulations are ready. We are working very quickly. The iteration process in a company like ours and in a robotics mission like ours is very rapid. And so we're confident that we'll have it in place. And this is why we look forward to working closely with the FAA on preparing for those rules.
Okay. Mr. Wynn, what specific solutions can you provide this committee that we could act on, or as to not only help the development of the commercial UAS, but also satisfy the FAA's concern for safety?
Well, I think, as I mentioned in my testimony, there's a lot of research and development that's required to prove out equivalent level of safety for the more complex operations that we can envisage today but can't possibly or can't quite do yet. And NASA plays an important role in this. The FAA plays an important role in this. The DoD has successfully flown unmanned and manned aircraft in theater for many, many years successfully and safely. They can learn from one another, and industry brings a lot of resources and technology to the table. So one of the key things is to make certain that all of that is well coordinated, and I think some outside pressure for the agencies to work together, I think, is always important. That's beginning to happen now, and we're very pleased with that. But I think there are resources ultimately that will be required. I know the fiscal constraints on the system make it difficult for new resources to be brought to the table, but we think that with the right coordination, with the right plan, we can do that, and I think that's an appropriate role for Congress and this committee.
Thank you. I see my time has almost expired, so I'll yield back to the chairman. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Walker. Ms. Duckworth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the see and avoid rules. Mr. Wynn, I think that your comparison to the military use is a little bit off mark, because I was actually in charge of the state of Illinois National Guard's attempt to establish the rules for flying shadow UAVs stateside, and we certainly had to comply with the keeping the aircraft inside at all time rules under the FAA and flying it over restricted airspace only as well. And so the military actually has to, if we're going to be flying those UAVs, actually follow the UAV in the air with another aircraft. And I don't think that is something that the commercial entities are willing to do at this point, and I could be wrong. I do want to talk about the safety issue, and I think I'm going to direct most of my comments, my questions to Mr. Whitaker with the FAA. I was flying my aircraft over the Eastern Shore in the Patuxent Naval Airspace area in contact with air traffic control the entire time, and I had an aircraft, a model aircraft, bust through the airspace 10 feet off the nose of my aircraft, about 10 feet away in front, and I was flying at 2,500 feet. If this can happen with recreational model aircraft usage, I have real concerns about UAVs out there flying around. And I understand if you have commercial operations, this is something where what you're trying to do is actually make it more regulated. And I would expect that commercial entities would be much more responsible about how they fly the aircraft. Are there any moves to require for commercial use the use of transponders on UAVs?
So you raise a lot of interesting issues. I think in the small UAS rule, of course, there would be an aeronautical knowledge test requirement, so your operators would be more sophisticated than the amateur operators. A lot of the operators on the amateur side are just not from the aviation sector and don't even realize that they've entered the world of airspace when they open the box for this device. And that's a real issue, which is why we've focused on public education and that type of thing. As far as the use of transponders, these devices, of course, come in all sizes. When you get to the small UAS, we're not sure there's going to be a technology that would allow that kind of equipage. If you're flying in airspace that requires a transponder, a UAS would have to have a transponder. Same for the new ADS-B rules. But I think when you get to the smaller vehicles, you're really looking to systems that talk to each other and to the vehicles around them to achieve that sense and avoid.
Okay, so if I'm out there in my single-engine 1959 Comanche, not with the most sophisticated, I'm going to have the correct transponders on it, but even a small UAS hitting the propeller of my aircraft will take me out.
Right.
Even a small bird will take me out. Are you saying then that we are not looking to require some sort? It's just explain what you mean by is it a transponder? Is it it's interrogating my aircraft? What is it doing? Because I want to know. Here's what I want. I, as a pilot, want to know if there's UAS flying in my vicinity, so I can see, so that it shows up, and I know that they're there. And two, if I get hit by one of these aircraft, I want to know who's flying it. I want a serial number on that aircraft. I want the FAA to be able to find them and say, you just flew into actual general aviation or commercial aviation airspace. Is there anything in that rule? Is there any attempt to go after those safety concerns?
So right now we are looking at rule separation and procedure separation. So under the small UAS rule, the proposal would be below 500 feet. And so you're always going to be above 500 feet unless you're around the airport. And the rule would require the UAS to be 5 miles away from an airport. So as long as they're following the rules and you're following the rules, you have separation. And you also have visual line of sight, VFR, basic operations. That's all that the rule contemplates. The other issues that you're raising are some of the issues that we've been talking about that need additional research, need standardization, and a separate set of rules around those expanded operations.
Okay, thank you. With just 30 seconds less that I have, I just want to put this out there, and I'll put in a question for the record. If we're going to talk about external load operations, I used to fly sling loads in helicopters. There are some significant restrictions. I would want to know what Amazon and Mr. Nguyen also, what your positions are on what are your jettisoning procedures for those loads. All of the issues that the helicopter with sling load operations would have to follow and adhere by as well. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, just kind of a point of clarification for me. I think the answer is yes, but I just want to be sure. Does the FAA or the administration actually have a plan for directing the traffic concerns? Or is this something that's being developed and still in process? Is there an actual plan?
There are two things I think you could put in that bucket. There's a comprehensive plan that was developed in 2013, and then there's a 5-year roadmap that gets updated periodically. It provides a sort of a master planning document, if you will, for.
So there is a plan?
Yes.
Okay. I thought that was going to be the answer, but it was a little confusing. Let me go, Mr. Kowalski, to you. Of course, we all know about the gyrocopter that went down here in restricted D.C. area this past April. The technology that is being developed with you guys, would it have detected that gyrocopter?
So the research that we're doing regarding this UAS traffic management system is to enable the users of the system to be able to track and manage and plan flight routes within a very confined airspace. Others that are operating within that airspace would also be detected, but if they choose not to follow a flight plan, they would not be managed by the UTM. So the opportunity for that system to identify that there is an operator who is not filing plans and not flying within the system can be alerted to the authorities or through the system such that actions could be taken in order to address that.
All right, well, that's no different than what we already have. It was detected with the technology we currently have. They thought it was an anomaly or some such kind of thing. You're saying with your technology it would be detected, but still nothing necessarily would have prevented what happened.
With the technology we were putting in place, that is correct. What our technology does is allow for the safe use of aircraft that are participating in the system to manage their trajectories, to be aware of other aircraft, general aviation aircraft, traffic helicopters and the like that are flying there, so that they can be safely avoided and the missions and business objectives can be met.
does your technology differentiate between drones and, say, movement of birds or weather patterns or what have you?
There are radar systems that are being developed as part of this that would be able to detect other flying things of particular size. At this point, I'm not sure exactly how small that detection goes, but it would allow for identification, certainly, of small drones.
All right. Mr. Whitaker, back to you again. Just, and I may ask different ones this question, but end of the day, who should control, own, manage the traffic management of UAS? Does this come down to NASA? Does it come down to the government? Does it come down to private enterprise or nonprofits? Where does this belong?
Well, we would envision that as NASA develops this UTM, we would go through a normal handover process, and it would become part of our airspace that we would manage.
All right, so you say FAA, okay.
Yes, if I may, sir. That's exactly correct. We have a very formal process we've developed with the FAA. We refer to them as research transition teams. We work closely with NASA researchers and FAA researchers at the earliest stages of our development of concepts and technology to be able to hand to them at determined times that we work by plan for that technology at technology readiness levels such that they have the opportunity to fit it into their overall program planning and their acquisition process. So it's a very rigorous activity. We've had great success with that with other next-gen deliverables over the last half a dozen years.
Okay, so NASA's developing the technology, but FAA would be using it, and ultimately the buck would stop there.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, Mr. Geiger, let me go back to you real quickly, just because I think the issues you've brought up are a grave concern constitutionally and to many others. And I've just got 20 seconds, but preemptively, what actions do you believe Congress needs to take in order to assure that both the First and the Fourth Amendment are not violated to U.S. citizens?
For government UAS, we recommend legislation that establishes a due process standard for law enforcement use, and we think that, generally speaking, with some exceptions, that standard should be a warrant. When the UAS is used to surveil individuals in a personally identifiable way or private property. When it comes to commercial UAS, we think that the First Amendment is going to constrain the scope of any sort of privacy regulation, and you could start with common law privacy torts, which have a highly offensive to a reasonable person or reasonable expectation of privacy standard. But beyond that, it should be an industry code of conduct, which will, because it is voluntary, avoid the First Amendment issues. And I think that the goal ought to be to provide a reasonable privacy assurance to the public so that applications that have a low impact on civil liberties, such as commerce or scientific research, can grow, and the industry itself will take off, so to speak.
Okay, sir, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you. Do we have, Mr. Whitaker, do we have a proposed timeline for the officially accepting these rules or the process to go through to modify them, make any corrections? Do we have a timeline?
So there's a statutory 16-month time frame from the close of comments, which was in April. We plan to move more quickly than that. We've got the 4,500 comments that we're adjudicating now, and our internal working target is to have the FAA portion of this finished by the end of the year so it can go into coordination with the administration and then be out early next year.
So many of you are aware that there is an app I can call Siri and I can say what's flying above me, and it will tell me what flights are above me in the sky and where they're going, what airline it is. Do you anticipate any such app? Because my concern right now is, as a citizen, and there's drones flying above me, how do I identify what they are and why they're there and who they belong to? And that piece, it was interesting to me when this application was introduced to me. And I'm wondering, is something similar to that will be required of this type of flying vehicle?
Well, in today's world, if there's a drone flying above you, it's probably an amateur operator, and there's no system to track who that is and where they're going. It's an unregulated, by statute, an unregulated sector of the market. As you move forward with more fully integrated operations in the controlled airspace, you would expect to have some ability to know who's out there.
Well, you said you would expect. I want us to move toward the point of, if there is a drone flying in my personal property space, that I as a citizen have the right to know who owns it, what's their purpose, and there would be a way for me to, if I have any issues, to have a way as a citizen to process that concern. And that to me is a very high concern of mine and people that I talk to. So getting back to the public, what will be the process of educating the public? And I would like to ask Mr.
Geiger.
What is the proposed process so that when I anticipate an increase in the number of drones that we'll see, where's the education process when we adopt the rules and we get them accepted? Where's the education of the public?
I think that you'll see education of the public from both government and private entities, and certainly there's been a lot of media attention about it. If the question is, how will the public know when there's a drone in their
or what are my rights?
Well, your rights are evolving, and as I said in my testimony, I think that your rights ought to be strengthened by Congress.
Yes.
When it comes to being able to tell whether or not, identify a drone that is in your vicinity and where it's going and so forth, we think that the industry and government ought to work on technology that will enable that sort of transparency for citizens. Transponders would be one option, but I understand that there are technical limitations due to their weight. I understand also that NASA is working with Verizon to leverage cell towers, and that may hold some promise, although that also depends on the network. In addition, we think that there are other technical measures that individuals could use to signal their privacy preferences. One is geofencing. So, for example, noflyzones.org is sort of a nascent effort in that regard, where you can delineate some property and say, we would prefer if you did not fly here. And so I think there's a variety of technologies that could get you there. I think that they're not quite yet ready for prime time, but I think what's important is that industry and government continue to work on them.
The other question, I have a few minutes, to Mr. Whitaker. In the rules, it talks about reporting an accident or damage within a certain amount of time. Will there be a requirement, if you are licensed as a drone operator, that you have insurance? Because if your drone disables and it crashes on my property, or if there is a package being delivered and it destroys my prized rose garden or something, what will be the requirement for insurance?
Typically, we do not regulate insurance requirements in aviation, so we leave it up to individual operators for insurance.
I just want to say for the record that if we are going to allow, find that interesting, you don't require airlines to have insurance?
Airlines have insurance for their own reasons, and most general aviation pilots have insurance for their own reasons. We're prohibited from regulating model aircraft, amateur aircraft operations, so we would not be allowed by statute to have that provision, but as a rule, we don't get into that area of requirement.
So if there was an accident, it was reported in 10 days, what happens?
What happens with respect to?
FAA would just have a record of it. It would not be any requirement for drone operators to be insured.
I mean, there typically will be a reporting requirement for accidents, and we investigate the cause of accidents. but don't get involved in adjudicating liability.
My time is up, but I just want to say for the record that that is a concern of mine. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now recognize long-suffering waiting and a senior member and also former chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't have any questions, but I do want to express some concerns. And to do that, I want to read from a couple of articles that have come out just in the last few days. I've read several articles about drones over the last year and a half, but Barry Weinberger, who's a lawyer who specializes in this area, wrote a few days ago, for example, will a drone scheduled to deliver your overnight package be allowed to collect information about you during drop-off, and if so, what kind of data? With drone technology advancing at a fast and furious pace, there are now UAVs with the ability to record video and audio, use facial recognition technology, and collect electronic data, including signals from cell phones, garage door openers, and radio frequency identification data, RFID, a technology used in consumer credit cards. And he mentions a case and some cases in which they are now using drones in divorce cases. And then Jeremy Scott, who is the head of an organization called the Electronic Privacy Information Center, wrote a few days ago, the FAA has also failed to consider the data collection implications of commercial drones. In an age of big data, companies flying commercial drones will likely look to surreptitiously collect data as they fly around performing other tasks, such as delivering packages. We saw a similar occurrence when Google Street View cars collected Wi-Fi data while taking images for Google Maps. One company has already tested using drones to pinpoint cell phone and Wi-Fi signals in order to identify customers for location-based advertising. And he goes on to say there exists a lot of potential for the commercial use of drones, but there needs to be rules in place to protect against broad surveillance and data collection. That's why more than 100 experts and civil liberties organizations petitioned the FAA to develop privacy rules for drones. The FAA denied the petition, and Epic has subsequently filed suit against the agency to force it to consider privacy. Currently, voluntary best practices are being developed, but best practices will not establish meaningful privacy safeguards. There's a lot of concern out there. Most people feel that we really don't have much privacy left anymore anyway due to the internet and all the modern technology and not just drones. But to show you how much concern there is, I understand that 10 states have now passed laws, and my own home state of Tennessee, which is a very pro-law enforcement state, very pro-law enforcement, the legislature passed a law banning law enforcement agencies from using drones to collect evidence, to do surveillance, except in extremely limited circumstances. And so what I'm hopeful is that maybe the FAA and some of your organizations will take a look at all these state laws, because the states seem to be sort of taking the lead in this so far, and see if you can't pick out some good things out of those state laws. And I think that Mr. Meisner, even companies that want to use this technology extensively, that because there is so much concern about privacy, that you would be, your company would be well advised to try to come up with every possible way that you can to protect what little privacy or what very limited privacy people still have. And that's all I've got to say, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you for making those points. Did you want to respond to any of that, Mr. Meisner? Or Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Duncan, I agree that a company like ours has to take privacy extremely responsibly. We've done it for 20 years now, and we'll certainly extend those kinds of privacy protections with respect to Amazon Prime Air, which of course is a delivery service, not a surveillance operation.
Mr. Geiger.
If people don't think that they have much privacy now, they should just wait for the new class of technologies that will enable very intrusive physical surveillance. That's just coming. The examples that you read are indeed troubling, and I'm glad that you mentioned in those passages that there are other types of surveillance that can be enabled by drones besides just video observation. They can be outfitted with an array of sensors that include, for example, cell phone tower emulators. We saw the federal government use these on tens of thousands of individuals just in the past year. In terms of how to provide individuals with that kind of privacy, you know, the privacy torts get you some, but again, it's limited because it's limited to a reasonable, what is highly offensive to a reasonable person standard. And it is unclear the degree to which Congress can directly regulate those kinds of uses without violating the First Amendment right to collect data in public places. However, we think that the industry should take the lead in a strong and enforceable code of conduct. And unfortunately, the existing codes of conduct are not sufficient for that purpose. You mentioned your state law. States are indeed taking the lead on privacy laws, but and part of that is because of federal inertia and in response to the concerns of their citizens. But the patchwork of state privacy laws is also going to be difficult for the industry to navigate, particularly for a technology like UAS, which could fly between the borders of individual states. So I think that providing some sort of regulatory certainty with regard to privacy will benefit both individuals as well as commerce.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. It really raises some pretty fundamental questions about the future and values and parts of our philosophy we thought were settled. And I think, Mr. Geiger, you're quite right to raise the flag on what does privacy mean as we move forward in the future. I mean, even a commercial drone whose mission is purely the delivery of a good could be equipped with surveillance equipment and actually penetrate the walls of a house and look into what's going on. Now, technology isn't far away from being able to do that. I'm not arguing anyone would do that, but we're going to, you know, and the proliferation of drones is going to make it very difficult to enforce even those regulations we ultimately adopt. So it's a fascinating frontier kind of issue for us, and I don't think we have easy answers yet, but I thank you so much for helping to highlight them. Mr. Whitaker, I was listening to Ms. Lawrence, and before I asked Mr. Meisner some questions about Amazon and their operation, what is, if I'm a homeowner, how high up do I go in my property control? Can someone fly 500 feet from my roof?
So I think as Mr. Geiger has...
I'm going to ask all of you, please, to speak into the mic and move it closer.
Yeah. So I think, as Mr. Geiger articulated earlier, it's a bit unsettled. Clearly, if it's 500 feet above your house, it's federally regulated airspace. And when federally regulated airspace was defined decades and decades ago, there was no thought of a gray area. But I think now we're probably facing a gray area. But by statute, all airspace is federal airspace and regulated federally.
So if a commercial drone is flying within 3 feet of my roof, is that federally regulated airspace?
I think you're pushing at those gray areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think we're going to have to revisit that too, because I mean, presumably somebody's flying in to deliver fine chocolates and French bubbly to my neighbor. Did I mention fine chocolates and French bubbly? You know, they may need to get close to land if that's what they're doing, and they may be violating, from my point of view, they're trespassing. They're trespassing on my property, including above my roof.
Yeah. I think these are real issues, and the legal structure hasn't had to address them before.
Okay.
So it is.
So we got legal issues, and we got privacy issues, and we got constitutional issues, and we got commercial issues, and we got economic issues, and all kinds of issues. Mr. Meisner, Amazon's been vocal about its concerns regarding the FAA proposed rule, and Amazon argues, and I quote, "Overly prescriptive restrictions are likely to have the unintended effect of stifling innovation, and over time will fail to offer any corresponding safety benefits as small UAS technology evolves." How do you believe the proposed rule stifles innovation? And I'm going to ask you particularly to speak into the mic. Thank you.
Mr. Connolly, I will speak directly in. Thank you. We believe that it's overly prescriptive in the sense that it draws distinctions between within visual line of sight and beyond visual line of sight kinds of operations in a way that is just artificial. I mean, both should be subjected to a risk and performance-based analysis. Certainly, the risks involved in beyond visual line of sight operations are greater than those within visual line of sight. Highly automated operations require higher performance than less automated operations. Those are very, very clear, but the method of analyzing the different kinds of operations should be identical. And so we were concerned that the NPRM tends to just cut those ones off and prescribe them, just basically say, we're not going to deal with them. Now, Mr. Whitaker said that the FAA is going to get to them. We're just suggesting that they get to them now and consider all these types of operations simultaneously, acknowledging that there are different risks involved and different performance requirements necessary to mitigate those risks.
I understand that Amazon's offered to actually show on a pilot basis that some of the concerns being discussed in the rulemaking can be managed without overly prescriptive regulation, including line of sight, including multiple drone operation and other such issues. Is that the case, that you've offered to do that kind of pilot program?
Yes, sir, in a variety of ways. We're working closely with NASA. In fact, we'll be a keynote presenter at your conference at the end of July. And, you know, the Pathfinder project being undertaken by BNSF, that's something that looks interesting to us, figure out a way to...
But, I mean, have you made that proposal to Mr. Whitaker and his colleagues that, why don't you let us show you how it can be done safely before you adopt a final rule?
Yeah, I think these are parallel paths. One is to show the technology, the other is to work on the rules.
Mr. Whitaker, are you and your agency open to that kind of demonstration to at least evaluate the parameters and scope of what is doable and what is problematic?
I think the Pathfinder program, which did that with BNSF, is the kind of program we need to have to prove those technologies. So we certainly are open to that.
Mm-hmm. And if the Chair will allow one final question, another provision you've expressed concern about, Mr. Meisner, Amazon that is to say, is the requirement that one operator control no more than one drone system at a time. Why do you believe that's too restrictive?
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Because the technology exists so that a single operator could oversee the operation of multiple UAVs. And just to restrict one drone to one operator is just overly restrictive and certainly unnecessary from a technological perspective.
Mr. Whitaker, that sounds reasonable on Amazon's part. I mean, I look at FAA controllers. We don't say to an FAA controller, you follow one plane coming in or going out, that's it. Because otherwise, we don't believe you've got control and it taxes the system. Maybe that's not a perfect analogy, but technology kind of does allow us to do more than one thing at a time. What's wrong with Amazon's point of view on that?
I think that we will get there in certain circumstances. I mean, right now you have 2 pilots in each airplane and you have controllers, and in a new system, if it's a large aircraft, certainly there will be 1 per aircraft, but if it's quite small, there could be scenarios where it's multiple units. But the technology has to be proven, standards have to be developed, and then it comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for having this hearing. I hope we have more of them, frankly, because I think we've just begun to look at new territory.
Important subject, Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2001, when I was under the tutelage of Ambassador Hank Crumpton, and we were prosecuting the war in Afghanistan, the CIA, the Counterterrorism Center and Special Operations Division kind of was the innovator in the use of drones in operations, right? You know, we had an Air Force bird, Army ordnance under the operational control of the CIA. Something like that had never happened. And almost 15 years ago, when we were doing that, I never would have thought that I'd be sitting somewhere talking about using UAVs to monitor, you know, herds of cattle in West Texas, or having fine chocolate or bubbly delivered to Mr. Connolly's neighbor. So this is an exciting time, but one of my concerns is, one of the things that's made this country great is we're always on the edge of innovation. We have the greatest entrepreneurs in the world, and my question is to Mr. Nguyen. In the development of this technology, is the U.S. leading on this, or do we have other competitors, or there's other countries that are beating us?
Well, it's a great question, sir, and thank you for your service. I would say simply that this is a global phenomenon. UAS are really being taken up at very rapid pace around the world for a variety of different reasons, and ultimately we want global harmonization of the regulations so that there's safe and responsible flight everywhere. I would say that we have the potential to continue to lead in aviation innovation in this country. I think we're on the right path to getting back to that. I think there has been a little bit of a culture clash from the technology world into the aviation world. I'm an aviator myself, as are some of the other panelists, and we appreciate the fact that that this is a different type of approach to aviation. But there's a lot of sky up there that can be used efficiently for an awful lot of things, and a lot of lives, frankly, that can be saved doing things that are very dangerous today that don't need to be done by humans. So we call that enhancing human potential.
Right. So my next question is to Mr. Meisner. The possibility, when I came up to D.C. from Texas this week, I forgot my running shoes, and the idea of possibly having those delivered by Amazon UAV, within a couple of hours is pretty interesting. But you've heard a lot of these privacy concerns that we've talked about here, and they're valid. And this is going to continue to be an issue. How are y'all? I think one of the things y'all leading in this area in commercial development. How are you planning to gain the trust of the American people?
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. It's a core question about this service for anyone who is responsibly pursuing a commercial activity here. We have to engender trust, and the trust on privacy matters that we've garnered over the past 20 years has been a result of our focus on consumer information privacy, and we will continue that when it comes to the Amazon Prime Air. We're strongly supportive of the NTIA process, and we're going to be participating in that and hopefully developing solid, serious best practices for an entire industry.
No, I appreciate that, and Mr. Kowalski, the question to you is, on this UAS traffic management system that y'all are working on, what are kind of the main challenges y'all have left that are the barriers to deployment of the system?
So many of the same concerns that have been brought up by other panelists are things that we need to address in a technological fashion. These are very complex software systems where you've got coordinated interaction among the aircraft, being able to verify and validate that they are safely providing that safe separation is a critical challenge. Ensuring safe operations for all UAS, but also other general aviation aircraft in that airspace is also a technical challenge we need to step up to, certainly beyond line of sight. And another key element that was again brought up by the panel is the challenge of the first and last 50 feet of flight. In particular, the last 50 feet, if you will, with the interaction, with potential interaction with property and people. The elements of the control, of the management of that safely in an environment that can be unpredictable is a major element of work that we're trying to develop technology solutions around and procedural solutions around.
Thank you.
Thank you, and waiting patiently, I want to recognize the lady from New Mexico, Ms. Luan Grisham. Thank you for your patience. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank you for the hearing, and I agree that we ought to have potentially more of the hearings because there's a broad base set of issues that do need to be addressed, and there needs to be a regulatory environment to do that. I certainly agree that we want to deal with the public safety issues, we want to deal with the privacy issues, but there is a real opportunity to enhance the economic benefits and making sure that that's addressed in a meaningful and balanced way. I represent a state that's been very slow to recover from the 2008 recession. In fact, we've got the slowest recovery rate in the country, and we've got a company, Polo, I need to look at that, Praviti, that's just gotten FAA approval. Our office worked with you all to do that, to do the kind of mapping and the kind of work that we're hearing a lot about in today's hearing. And not only are they talking about the vast economic opportunity in our state, and whenever I have an opportunity to talk about jobs, that's the #1 priority, but they talk about nationally that the billions of dollars that could be generated, so I appreciate having Google here at the table, by these investments. There's also a public safety factor that I don't want to ignore, not just in the regulatory environment that we need to proceed with for unmanned aircrafts, but if we're using them to assess problems on the Golden Gate Bridge, or we're using them to inspect power lines, we're creating a public safety benefit by not having to use workers to do that work directly and physically, which is high risk and continues to be problematic. When I think about liability for companies and governments and local governments and utility companies, it's significant. So I'm seeing great opportunity, and with that there is risk. I have really two questions. You've been working to address that you recognize that there's got to be a thoughtful but balanced approach. And as a former long time, and I would like to think effective bureaucrat for 17 years, bureaucracies don't always find themselves in the most flexible environment. And the problem here is that this technology is changing every minute, probably every second, as all technology does. And in the thoughtful process that you will have to address privacy and public safety and managing that airspace productively and encouraging companies to come forward and give you ideas so that we're not thwarting those valuable economic investments, by the time you make those rules, arguably they could be outdated. What is your process for thinking about making sure that this is a fluid, ongoing environment so that we avail ourselves of every opportunity without mitigating our responsibility to manage productively for my constituents and for the country real risks associated with any aircraft? Mr. Whitaker, maybe that's something for you.
I think several times this morning it's been mentioned that we need a risk-based and a performance-based regulatory system, and that's very much, we're all very much aligned on that point. We don't want to necessarily tell you how you're going to achieve certain levels of safety, but we want to define what those are and what the necessary standards are to get there. So when we, for example, get to a final rule, then it will provide parameters, and then the operations within those parameters, we don't have to guess what they might be. They'll be allowed as long as they continue to be safe. And as we continue to expand the acceptable range of operations, that same principle will apply.
And maybe, Mr. Wynn, what can Congress do that's more productive in this environment that provides both productive resources and investments in this, just exactly this sort of risk assessment and performance model? What is Congress's role here, and what can we do to enhance these efforts?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think the point that I've been laboring to articulate here is that the economic opportunity is not just immediate; it needs to be sustainable. And so all of the questions that we're discussing in technology, we call it a binary conversation. Really cool technology can do a lot of good stuff, but we have safety, we have security, we have privacy questions. We go through this with every technology, pretty much. And the same kinds of questions Mr. Geiger is bringing up can also be applied on a technology-specific basis to license plate readers. They can be applied to body cameras. They can be applied in a whole bunch of different technology contexts. The industry needs to do this in a way that's sustainable. Otherwise, it won't work. And
I agree with Mr. Meisner when he said, it's in our interest to make certain that our customers' privacy is protected, and it's in our interest also as an industry to make certain that we can do this on a sustained basis. Incidents, mishaps, et cetera, while they are common in aviation and we learn from them, we don't want them. And we're doing our best to make certain that we maintain the extremely high level of safety going forward. To your question, ma'am, I think all of this comes back to FAA reauthorization, which is an extremely important matter before Congress immediately. And we have submitted for the record of the Transportation Committee what we think is important in that regard, so I won't enumerate that here. But I think it's also really important for the safety of the entire system that we do that on time.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience. I want to thank our panel, too. I've got a couple of quick points. One, okay, Mr. Whitaker, you testified today that it would, in 1 year, you would have the rule out. Is that going to be September 30th of 2016, or is that going to be June 17th of 2016?
Hopefully before June 17th of 2016.
Okay, so that's 1 year from today. We'll note that in the record, and I'll ask the staff to schedule a hearing in June of next year, and we'll see how we're going there. I think you got to have milestones to get things done. I put a milestone in the bill, which was September of this year. It's not going to be met. And we are operating on sort of a helter-skelter basis with these waivers and exemptions. And you told me you'd been doing about 50 a week, is it?
That's correct.
So 50 a week. We've got 10 weeks is 500. By the time of next year, we should be doing, how many? Several thousand at that rate. So we'll have a patchwork of exemptions and waivers until we get to the final rule. I mean, if you keep it up at that rate,
Yeah.
just an assumption.
I mean,
But
we're working.
See, that's not totally acceptable. I know you have to have something in the interim. The other thing, too, is the Office of Inspector General published this report June 26, 2014, with a list of recommendations. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 major recommendations by OIG. Now, I have a report as of June, that's this month, of 2015. All of these are unmet. All of these are unmet. Some were supposed to be achieved and accomplished by here's one, October 30th, 2014. I'm going to submit to UNFA this list, and within the time, we're keeping the record open for 10 days, I want a response that will be in the record of make certain that this is your response to OIG, but I want to make certain that that is in the record and confirm when you will achieve the recommendations that OIG put in their audit from 2014 that they're giving me this report on this month, 2015. Do you see what I want? Any questions?
No.
In the record by the time. So again, we're going to do another hearing a year out. You said you're going to do that. These are important milestones that OIG identified a year ago to be completed, and I want that report in the record so that we have these milestones met. All right, so then final thing, you talked about, Mr. Meisner, the sensor and avoidance technologies. Now, they're important because you can put these things up, you testified, and you have technologies either being developed or on the shelf that can avoid collisions or incidents. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Now, but those systems have to be approved by FAA for use, wouldn't they, Mr. Whitaker?
Yes, we'll have to verify the technology.
And see, this goes back to my point at the beginning. I think the last member, too, raised this technology is changing dramatically. But we have a failure of the law to keep up with rules and regulation to keep up. So we're going to have some mechanism to make certain that, in fact, the equipment that can avoid risk, avoid a disaster, avoid collision, is certified in a manner. Do you have a separate office certifying this type of equipment?
We certify aircraft on a number of fronts, and ultimately we'll...
I know, but that is also, I hear lots of complaints, how long it takes for certification, how further behind we're falling. But we're doing an FAA bill, we're doing a FAA appropriations. We need to make certain that you have the resources, that you've set in place a mechanism to quickly certify the technologies or do it in some reasonable fashion. The problem you've got now is by the time they get the damn technology done and you get it approved, there'll be another technology right behind it that is even faster. So we're falling further behind in our certification of equipment that will avoid disaster. You see what I'm saying? FAA doesn't look very prospectively or how they're going to sometimes handle these things. And if this is all just bowled into FAA normal certification, I don't think it's going to succeed. So if you have a recommendation or something you want to come back at, what you need to beef up, if you need to separate out, if we need someone in FAA and focused on this for the future. At stake is, one, safety, and two is our entering the commercial age, which this is all about. But you can't do that unless you've got the rules, the certification, and keeping up with the technology. They'll find a way to get that. I thought it was, you said chopped liver. He said, Hurd said chopped liver, but it was fine chocolates. To Mr. A little fun with that, but in any event, whatever we're delivering, it's a commercial opportunity and a great economic boost. Okay, so those are my quick questions, and it's amazing what we've done. They've already flown unmanned vehicle or aerial vehicle from Australia to Los Angeles, a cargo plane without a pilot. And then another thing, too, is certifying the pilots, because there are different categories of what's going up there, but different categories of who should be qualified if they're not in the drone, but they're piloting the drone. We've got to make certain we've got the rules in place, so those people also have the qualifications. But I'm afraid we're not keeping up with it, and we've got to be able to set in law and the FAA reauthorization or wherever. And then we haven't even talked about the privacy issue here. Again, I go back to the problem we had when we developed this. We were told no to privacy. It was a different domain and jurisdiction. But that is very important, and I'll look at the proposed legislation and the other things you mentioned. But again, the Transportation Committee was not allowed to go down that path, but it's a serious one we need to address. I think that those are some of the major issues, and we'll look forward to your response. We'll make certain the staff gives you a copy of this list, and we want that in the record. Again, I thank each of you for participating, our members for their patience, productive hearing, and hopefully move this all forward together. There being no further business before the full Committee of Government Reform and Oversight, this hearing is adjourned.